Oklahoma linebacker Danny Stutsman might end up being one of the most impactful players of the Saints 2025 draft class. We got all that and a little bit of lanyap for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, don't worry about what the national folks are telling you. The New Orleans Saints roster absolutely has talent. The Saints wide receiver room might be one of the most contentious rooms you're going to find on the field at training camp, and Danny Stutsman, fourth round pick in this year's NFL draft, the linebacker, is the real deal. We got that coming up for you on today's episode. We appreciate you, whether it's your first time or your next time, being here with us this time, making us your first listen, and being it every day or here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you were looking for an impact player from this New Orleans Saints 9-man 2025 NFL draft class, there are certainly some names to choose from Kelvin Banks Jr., the first round pick, who is going to be a week one starter. Second round pick Tyler Shuck could be a week one starter and the future of this organization at quarterback. But it's also fourth round pick linebacker out of Oklahoma, Danny Stutsman, that has everything necessary to be a long-term impact player in this New Orleans Saints defense. Three main reasons why. Number one has everything to do with leadership and attitude. Number two comes down to what he's going to bring to this team in terms of its run game and what they are in need of when it comes to improving their run defense. And in the final piece for me completely comes down to vibes and the way that he should be somebody that becomes a quick fan favorite. Those are three things you got to be able to do in the NFL. You got to be able to lead, you got to be able to produce, and the fans got to love you. And if you can check all three of those boxes, you are on your way to be an impact player and potential stardom in the league. Let's start off with number one, leadership. When it comes to Danny Stutsman, we know that that's one of his best attributes. You're talking about a team leader kind of guy, a guy that led that Oklahoma defense that was just outside the top 10, ranked number 12 in all of college football in the NCAA, at least last year. When it came to yards per attempt allowed, just over 3.1 yards per attempt. Remember, the Saints defense in 2024 was nearly 5 yards per attempt that they had given up throughout the year. So you see a guy there that was able to lead a team that made that leap from Big 12, where defenses were merely a suggestion, to going into the SEC, where defense dominates. And they didn't put together a dominant defense. He didn't lead a dominant defense for an entire year, but he led a defense that early on in the year was fantastic, particularly when it came to the run game. Then you look at his ability to communicate and all of the things that stand out for him when it comes to a smarts perspective. You can see the way that he reads and diagnoses and then is able to make a break on the football, reading play foes, beating ball carriers to their point of attack. All these things have been consistent for him all throughout his time in college football, plus has the ability and the athleticism to drop into coverage and make a difference there as well. One of the big things, and it's funny because we talked about something very similar to this when it came to Pete Werner, when Pete Werner was drafted in the second round coming out of Ohio State, was can he make sure that he is bringing playmaking ability along with him to the league? And so if Danny Stutsman's able to do that in a way that Pete Werner is still kind of fighting to prove that he can do, then that's going to put Danny Stutsman in a really, really good position in terms of being somebody that can stand up next to Pete Werner in the future if once Demario Davis eventually departs, or whatever the future looks like for the position at linebacker. As of right now, it's hard not to see Danny Stutsman being an impactful part of that future. The second thing that I wanted to look at was his contributions to the run defense. We took a look at a metric that I really like a lot when it comes to examining run defenses that isn't just about, how many tackles did they have and how many tackles for a loss did they have, but going beyond that and taking a look at where those tackles were happening specifically in the run game. We talked about this with Vernon Broughton just a couple of days ago and how his mark when it came to the average depth of tackle was better than most of the New Orleans Saints defensive linemen, with the exception of Nathan Shepard as well as as well as John Ridgeway. And so now you look at where Danny Stutsman comes in, and we look at that same metric. And again, very, very impressive. Average depth of tackle measures the amount of yards gained by a running back before a defender is typically making their tackle. And remember, we're talking about a linebacker here. We're not talking about somebody that's lined up on the line of scrimmage that is immediately a part of the congestion factor for a running back. But despite talking about a linebacker, when we take a look at where it is that Danny Stutsman ranks amongst those Oklahoma defensive players in 2024 in average depth of tackle, 2.2 yards. That's better than the entire New Orleans Saints defensive line or interior defensive linemen last year. Name any interior defensive lineman, which is where a lot of these runs are coming. Danny Stutsman had a better average depth of tackle coming from behind the defensive line than those that were on it. What that shows you is that he does understand how to shoot gaps, how to fit runs, and how to make tackles when he is there. Let's compare that to the rest of the New Orleans Saints defensive players at that linebacker core, with the exception of DeMarco Jackson, as well as Anthony Orji, who both played less than 100 run defense snaps last year. When it comes to linebackers, Demario Davis, 3.4. When it comes to Pete Werner, 3.7. And remember, Danny Stutsman, a full yard better at 2.2. Now, we have to remember that a part of this is transitioning your game from college to the pros. It's a very different game. So you're going to maintain that 2.2, or you're going to be able to get down there and make those same reads. You're going to be able to get there and beat the running back to their point of attack when you have much faster play in the NFL than you have in college, much more polished play in the NFL than you have in college as well. Those are obviously questions that have to get answered. But from what you can see from him on tape, the way that he stands out, the way that he attacks, the way that he makes his tackles, and these types of metrics, it's a pretty good showing of promise in favor of the impact that a guy like Danny Stutsman could have. Let's go one more step further on the run defense side, and this one looks at missed tackles. 9 missed tackles last year, despite having 61 total tackles in 2024. That was a 9.6 missed tackle ranking. And remember, we're just talking about run defense here. So 9.6% missed tackle rating when it came to run defense last season. Demario Davis, 12.8. Pete Werner, 12.7. So you're looking at a big time improvement when it comes to a player that is in a position where he should be missing more tackles at the collegiate level. So both of those metrics aren't to say that he's better than Demario Davis or that he's better than Pete Werner, but that he's going to be an excellent addition alongside one of or both of those guys at some point during his rookie deal. I believe that Danny Stutsman will be an impact player for the New Orleans Saints and will be one of the most impactful players from this 2025 draft class of 9 players for New Orleans. So excellent stuff there. Finally, vibes, right? And Danny Stutsman is a vibes kind of guy. Fans already love him. Fans have already kind of made him a fan favorite, but I think that once you get to see him a little bit more on the field, once you get to hear a little bit more from him, I'm sure that they'll elevate him a little bit when it comes to social media, kind of like they did Bub Means last year and everything, and get him introduced to this fan base a little bit more. But then seeing him on the field, hearing the way that he communicates, hearing him bark at practices, hopefully some of those training camp practices are open, whether they be here, whether the ones here in New Orleans or the ones out in Irvine, and get an opportunity to lay your eyes on the Saints' new number 47 in Danny Stutsman. And I think he's just going to be a dude that quickly becomes and maintains himself as a favorite. Spicy, fun Instagram presence here or there or anywhere. Him as a human himself is a lot of fun to be around and a lot of fun to witness out on the football field. So between his ability to lead, his ability to help the New Orleans Saints where they need the most help over the defensive side as a number 31 ranked run defense last year, and his ability to endear himself to a fan base, which this rookie class is doing extremely well, to me, Danny Stutsman is well on his way to being the real deal for the New Orleans Saints and an impactful piece of this draft class. Coming up next, speaking of impact, of course you want that wide receiver room to have an impact this season, but before they get there, we're going to check out all of the battles that will be taking place at that position throughout training camp, because it's going to be a fun one to watch. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Monarch Money. Monarch Money is the personal CFO that you need to help you maintain full visibility and control over your finances, everything from investments to accounts to spending to budgeting and more. You can find it all over at Monarch Money. Look, they gave us a code so that we could use this app on like a trial basis. And it's one of the things that was the easiest decision that I've ever made in terms of where I wanted to dedicate a little bit more of my own cash. And Monarch Money was an easy decision to keep it beyond that trial period because of how helpful it was. Tracking my expenses, like my travel, all the other things that I spend money on to be able to do the best work possible, all that stuff. And then making sure that I'm maintaining and sharing that information. Excellent stuff. Monarch Money has been a lifesaver. I think it can be very helpful for you as well. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Promo code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. All right, family, the New Orleans Saints wide receiver room will have to have an impact in 2025, even though we expect the Saints offense to be a little bit more run-heavy focused. But before they get to that 2025 season and having that impact, there's a lot going on in that room when it comes to training camp. And I think it's going to be one of the more hotly contested positions, even though the top of the position is absolutely locked down. But there's a lot of talent here in this room, and there's a lot of talent and potential for these players to potentially move their way up the line and land a roster spot, get a practice squad spot, and still have the opportunity to see some playing time. So I wanted to take a look at the entire wide receiver position group real quick and just kind of lay out where things are, where the battles are happening, who are the locks, and where you could see the roster and practice squad begin to take shape. And of course, always the possibility of new faces that can be introduced to that conversation as well. So let's start with the locks at the top, right? The guys that we know are at the top of this roster spot that are going to hold roster spots that are going to be a part of the 53-man roster. Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, Brandin Cooks. Very, very easy, very, very simple. Chris Olave coming back off of an injury-riddled 2024 season, but the Saints have shown how much they very much believe in his health as well as his contributions. In 2 of his first 3 seasons, 1,000 yards of receiving. He's the only receiver to have 1,000 yards, or really the only pass catcher for New Orleans to have 1,000 yards since that incredible 2019 season by Michael Thomas. And so Chris Olave is absolutely the number one focus in the passing game for the New Orleans Saints. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And the Saints have kind of evidenced all of that by picking up his 5th-year option for 2026, the 2022 first rounder. And so that gives them the opportunity to keep him around on a more cost-controlled basis going into next year. So we'll see where things go for him. But in 2025, he is absolutely going to be the focus of this New Orleans Saints passing game. Rashid Shaheed, well, it should have a larger role in 2025. One of the things that I advocate for is getting him a little bit more involved in that jet sweep game, that end-around game, utilizing him out of the backfield, even if it's just to run routes and be a decoy, things like that. But finding other ways to get him involved in the game and get the ball in his hands. You'll remember that his first career touch was a 44-yard house call on a jet sweep week 6 of the 2022 season up against the Cincinnati Bengals. A very exciting moment. And then, of course, his next touch was a 50-plus yard touchdown catch down the field delivered by Andy Dalton on an atrocious Thursday night football game up against the what turned into an atrocious Thursday night football game up against the Arizona Cardinals. But I think beyond all of that, you know that he's explosive. You know he could be that deep threat. He's become one of the NFL's perennial deep threats over the course of his time here in the NFL. That continued last season up until his injury. And I think that this year, if he can stay healthy and stay on the field, and if the team can help keep him healthy, then that should absolutely allow him to have a more involved role going into 2025, getting him more involved in the run game, getting the ball in his hands in more creative ways, even just getting the ball to him in space to allow him to be able to take advantage of that returner ability that he has. And then Brandin Cooks is a lock for me very easily. 2-year, $13 million deal. He's the veteran, and he gives you another speedy option at the position as well. Also, coming off of injury, things like that. So something to watch with all 3 of these guys are going to be injury. But before that question comes into focus at all, they are locks for this New Orleans Saints 53-man roster. Let's take a look at the group that I would say is most expected to battle for a spot on the 53-man roster, and they're all the returning faces. Second-year wide receiver Bub Means, Cedrick Wilson Jr. is back, Kevin Austin Jr. is back, Dante Pettis and Mason Tipton. Of them, the three guys that I'll highlight earliest, Bub Means, Cedrick Wilson Jr., and Dante Pettis. Those are the guys that out of this group have had sort of the biggest impact plays throughout OTAs and minicamp when media was present. But remember, there were a bunch of OTAs that we didn't see, right? But I will say that the hype right now around Bub Means inside the building is really good. They feel really good about where he's at. He feels really good about where he's at. He loves this offense, and he looks like he has taken some steps forward in terms of route running, which was clearly a big focus for him over the course of the offseason. So for him, as one of the quote-unquote bigger bodies on the team, him, Cedrick Wilson Jr., and Kevin Austin Jr., three of the four players on the roster right now that are 6'2", one of two teams across the NFL. It doesn't have anybody 6'3" or above on their roster at this position, hence why new faces could become a thing. I would say that Bub Means is probably the guy that is the most likely to hold a spot right now because he's young, he's fiery, he's dedicated, he's motivated, he wants to block, he wants to tackle if he gets the chance, he wants to play on special teams, he wants to catch the football, he wants to run the football, he wants to do whatever it is that will get him to be a part of the game. And I think that all of that attitude does mean something. Cedrick Wilson Jr. reunites with reunites with Kellen Moore, New Orleans Saints head coach. Kellen Moore got the best out of Cedrick Wilson in his career with a 45 reception, 602 receiving yards, 6 touchdown catch year back in 2021 with the Dallas Cowboys. So it's a guy, these two guys know each other really well. Now they're reunited here in New Orleans. Could the Saints get that play that they wanted out of Cedrick Wilson Jr. as a potential slot option, which is where in 2021 he had his biggest impact under Kellen Moore? If they can get that from him, then he becomes a really good complement to these other speedy receivers on the outside, which the Saints have so many of on their roster that you just look for, okay, what's different? Cedrick Wilson Jr. is different. When it comes different than that. And when it comes to Dante Pettis, he's just one of the other guys that has stood out the most. His route running is outstanding. It's actually ridiculous. Honestly, like he's one of the best route runners I've gotten to watch. And you wouldn't, like, people don't think about him that way. He came out of Washington early, years ago, and then never really fully came to life over in San Francisco, and then kind of bounced around, showed up here in New Orleans, and had a touchdown last year. But it's been what his chemistry building has been with Spencer Rattler as well as Tyler Shuck that maybe gives me a little bit more like, oh, okay, he's building chemistry with the quarterbacks. The quarterbacks trust him. They know where he's going to be, how he's going to get there, and how quickly he'll get there on the field. All of that's really important when your offense is timing based, like Kellen Moore's is going to be in the passing game. And so I think a guy like Dante Pettis has real value in that scheme. I do want to elevate guys like Mason Tipton and Kevin Austin Jr. I don't mean to leave them out of the conversation. It's just like we haven't seen a ton from them yet. But remember, Mason Tipton was cooking early on in training camp last year. If he can put himself back on the map by restarting that flame from a year ago, then I think that would get him back on the map. Kevin Austin Jr., same thing, had some big plays in training camp. If he can do that again, I think that it helps. 3 new additions beyond Brandin Cooks, of course, free agent Donovan Peoples-Jones, and then undrafted free agent rookies Moochie Dixon out of SMU, as well as Chris Tyree, most recently out of Notre Dame. And these are guys that are all bringing a little something extra to the table. Donovan Peoples-Jones has shown you that he could manage adversity and come back. He's got a fresh start here with New Orleans. I think he can absolutely make the roster. He's another one of the 6'2" group. Can block and was an outstanding blocker during his time in college before he entered the league. I'm very much looking forward to seeing him during training camp. Moochie Dixon gives you some yards after catch ability. He was a threat all the time over at SMU. And Chris Tyree gives you this interesting, versatile piece that has played running back and then transitioned over to wide receiver. And so I think that there's something exciting potentially to watch there as well. So training camp's going to be a lot of fun to watch from the wide receiver position. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints, no matter what they tell you, don't lack talent. I think that the Saints' offseason moves showed you that they feel the same way. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. There's a lot of talk right now around roster rankings and all these other things. And I think coming at it from a local perspective and trying to sort of translate what we see maybe more than others and things like that into not necessarily like hype merchantry or anything like that. Like, I'm not trying to sell hype. I don't think you can sell hype. They're in the middle of a rebuild. Like, this is still what this team is, and we'll see where things go. It's, again, the word that I would use is a rebuild. The word that they would use probably is not rebuild, and fine, good on them. Like, they shouldn't and everything. I get the mentality there. But this is a rebuilding team. Like, this is a team that in the life cycle of the NFL, you get those upswings where you're a competitive team, and the Saints did that from 2006 to 2020, 2021, and then now they're kind of on a downswing, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, all playoff drought seasons, right? They have not been to the playoffs in those 4 years. And so for New Orleans, this is an opportunity to reset, redo, rebrand, rebuild, re-identify, whatever it is. And I think that the Saints have a better roster than they're given credit for, even though they didn't do a lot to improve it over the course of this offseason, in my opinion, right? My opinion is that there's not really a massively improved position group, maybe offensive line. I think that's the one that's maybe most promising, but the wide receiver room is still majority the same. The tight end room is almost exactly the same. Quarterback's a big question mark. Running back room is almost exactly the same with a couple of new faces that bring some potential. Defensive line, mostly the same, but big time transition in terms of scheme and change there. And so some new additions that did come in do add to that group. Devon Godchaux, Vernon Broughton, Jonah Williams, so on and so forth. The secondary, it's a tough one because you got two stud safeties in Tyrann Mathieu and Justin Reed that bring veteran experience, some solid backups there too. But you did lose between week 1 of last year and week 1 of this upcoming year, Marshawn Lattimore and Paul Sidibe, both of your starting corners. So there's always going to be question marks there. But I think you've got good talent in Kool-Aid McKinstry. I think you have underrated talent in Isaac Yiadom. And I think you, of course, are getting Alontae Taylor back where it is that it matters for him in the slot where he was most impactful last year. And in that linebacker room is still considered a top 10 unit led by Demario Davis and Pete Werner across the league. But now you add in Danny Stutsman and you still get some pretty good play from some of the younger guys that maybe haven't gotten much opportunity, but it's because the top linebackers tend to stay on the field. And of course, they had Willie Gay last year. So we'll see kind of how the health impacts all this, but I don't think that the Saints are a low-ranking roster in terms of talent. I think that the issue for them in the past 2 years is bad coaching decisions and injury. And I'll put injury aside because injury happens to every team, but I do think bad coaching decisions, and I'm not just talking about decision-making in games, I'm talking about the decision to promote Dennis Allen in the first place, the decision to keep Pete Carmichael in the first place, so on and so forth. Like this roster, and the hiring of Todd Grantham obviously didn't go well on the defensive side. This is a roster that was kind of hamstrung by the decisions that built the coaching staff and then thereby the inadequacies of the coaching staff that was built, right? Like we've seen and said this over and over again that the Saints have talent on the roster, and we've said this the past couple of years, but it didn't feel like the decisions or the coaching or the staff or the game plan or the play calling or whatever was really necessarily maximizing that play. And I don't think that with the exception of downfield play, this team's offense was maximized by its former quarterback either. And I think that's easy to see with throws behind on crossing routes and things like that halted momentum to pick up yards after catch, all that, like ball location, all these other pieces, plus pressure, plus injuries on the interior of the offensive line, all these other pieces. I just don't think that this roster ever got maximized over the course of the past couple of years. And while it's majority the same roster, really, when you look at it, with some major exceptions, including that cornerback spot like we talked about and the quarterback spot, I do think, though, that the other issue is that it's just that many years older, right? And so even though it is still as talented, you do have the question marks about the age, the ability to hold up, the fatigue, the stamina, the endurance, the durability, all those other things. But I think you look at this draft class, which kept durability at a very high ranking piece. Again, there were so many of those players out of that 9-player draft class had 50 or more games of experience and hadn't ever missed more than a couple games. And 8 of the 9 hadn't missed more than a couple games due to injury within a single season within their careers. Devin Neal, the running back that comes in from Kansas, who could be, this big piece that just got added to the running back room that no one knows about yet, he never missed a game due to injury. Incredible. And had numerous 1,000-yard rushing seasons in the process. He was not a light workload guy. Did he get the 250 to 300 carries in a single season? No, but that's good. That means he's got a lot of tread left on the tire in addition, or on his tires, in addition to being a guy that proves some durability. So I take a little bit of issue with the idea that the Saints are like a bottom 5 roster in the NFL, because I don't think that their lack of success, which I do think factors into rankings and those types of conversations, it's why I rarely ever talk about them on the show unless I'm doing my own. It's because like the context of, is the team a winning team, or does the team have a winning record, or did the team make the playoffs? All of that gets focused in and colors how it is that somebody might feel about this New Orleans Saints roster, even though really the roster wasn't the situation or wasn't really the problem. And I think that the Saints offseason this year showed you that. They go out there and they get Kellen Moore. Kellen Moore hires Brandon Staley. He promotes Phil Galliano over on the special team side, which the Saints have always had a solid special teams side of their game. We didn't even have to talk about that. And then flipped the coaching staff, made a bunch of changes, a lot of things that were Kellen Moore's decisions, not Mickey Loomis's decisions. And despite Kellen Moore having all this runway, he maintained a good portion of the roster. Now, some of that has to do with the salary cap situation. I understand that, and I expect that in 2026 there will be more roster turnover depending on how 2025 goes, which I don't expect to be massively successful, but I do think will be better than at least create a better outlook than what they left 2024 having. But he didn't flip the roster in its entirety over the course of the 2024 offseason. And so or 2025 offseason. And so I think that tells you that this team, this coaching staff feels that there is talent on this roster that maybe the last regime didn't take advantage of, that this regime can. All right, coming up in tomorrow's episode, Taliese Fuanga might be one of the most important players on the New Orleans Saints offense, not just for 2025, but beyond. We got that coming up for you in tomorrow's episode. We appreciate you very much for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me in the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.